Joining us now is Dave Dulio. He is a professor of political science and the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Dave, thank you for being with us again.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Tyler. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So, we should just immediately go into the unfortunate incident that happened on Tuesday, November 30th at Oxford High School, where 4 kids and 7 additional people, 4 kids killed and 7 additional people injured in a school shooting right here in Oakland County at Oxford High School. And so once again, here we are sprung into the debate in the aftermath, as we see so often with these school shootings around the U.S. Whenever this happens, the immediate discussion turns into a debate over what can we do to stop this, how can we prevent another one from happening, and it becomes a two-pronged debate, at least initially. On one end, it's a mental health debate. It's considered a mental health problem. On the other end, it's considered a gun safety and a gun control problem, and that often leads to political vitriol and really, as I called it yesterday, a shouting match begins. Problem solving doesn't begin. It's a shouting process. For you, as the director of civic engagement at Oakland, of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, as you have discussions on these kinds of hot button issues and important issues, and important topics that all often are very complicated problems that require creative and sensitive problem-solving efforts, where should we be beginning these conversations on whether it be the gun issue, the mental health issue, the overall issues that go into the occurrence of these school shootings? That, I know, being a broad question, but at the very least to begin a productive conversation, as opposed to a shouting match that ultimately leads nowhere and ends up snuffing out the conversation altogether.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tyler. In my view, one of the reasons that we maybe seem to make very little progress on maybe this or any host of issues, frankly, is that too quickly it does devolve into a shouting match. And I think that happens, at least to some degree, because the different sides, people that disagree, don't come to the conversation with any respect for the other, right? And they're seen immediately as political opponents. They're seen immediately as somebody's trying to infringe on this, or somebody's not doing enough on that. And in my view, when you start from that kind of rancorous, contentious position, you can't get anywhere.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University and professor of political science, joining us on the MegaCast. And I said it yesterday, it's an issue, the school shooting issue and the school shooting debate, it's an issue that it doesn't really hit home until it hits home. And with this being so local to us in Oakland County in particular, but even on a broader scale across the state of Michigan, with this affecting people of all ages and in all sectors of our state, the debate begins immediately, and often that debate on the political spectrum is obstructed, particularly on the gun issue, because of affiliations with different organizations, particularly with the NRA, for more so for the Republicans than the Democrats. So somehow the NRA and gun owners make it impossible, or at least, or better yet, why does that affiliation seem to make it so tough to even begin any sort of substantial debate on the political side, on the policy-making side, related to gun laws federally and even statewide?
Well, I'm not so sure it's the power of the NRA as it is the elected officials that are in office, right? The NRA isn't making any decisions. The NRA isn't stopping any proposed law from making headway, right? It's elected officials that are doing that, and I think that it's no secret, right? We have a Republican majority in both chambers of the legislature, and the Republicans tend to not be terribly supportive of increased gun control measures, and that's for a number of reasons, right? And you'd have to talk to an individual legislator to know exactly what that individual is thinking. But I can think of at least two off the top of my head, and that is one, that they don't agree with it personally, right? They don't think that increased gun control legislation is necessary or good or however they want to put it. And the other one is they're reflecting their constituents, right? We have a lot of places in the state of Michigan and across the country, very rural in nature, where firearms are used for multiple purposes, and those folks don't want to see any rolling back of the rights and liberties that they say they enjoy.
We're joined by Dave Dulio. He's a professor of political science and the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. And often in that debate that we're speaking on and related to gun issues, it dates back to protection of Second Amendment rights. And the Second Amendment quite explicitly states, quote, that you have the right to, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Back in 1791, when that was written, and the Bill of Rights was ratified, what did that mean then, and what interpretation is generally being so protected in today's world, being that our gun situation today is significantly different, significantly more powerful, and much more broadly utilized by Americans than it was back when it was ratified way back in 1791 or even in the early days of this country?
Sure. Well, I think the answer to your question lies in some recent Supreme Court decisions, and that is that that it extends beyond a militia, right? It is a personal and individual right to keep and bear arms, right? I mean, and that's where the court is right now. That's where the law is right now.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, joining us today on the MegaCast. Across the board here in Michigan and federally, there are a number of other political issues that are on the forefront and other political topics that are going to be on the forefront in 2022, including here in Michigan, our gubernatorial election coming up next year. Since we last spoke, Kevin Rinke, a business owner of Rinke Automotive Group, announced that he's running as a Republican for governor, for Michigan's next governor. He was a Trump supporter as well, for greater context of where he stands within the Republican Party. What are his chances here in the state of Michigan, or at least within the Republican Party, of obtaining the nomination from the party and then competing with Governor Whitmer?
Well, let's start with the primary first, because anybody that's going to challenge the governor's got to get through that, right? And in August of 22, we will have a primary election, and Republicans and not just Republicans, anybody who wants to vote in the Republican primary for governor can here in Michigan because of our open primary system. But I think it's wide open. Mr. Rinke has some advantages. I think on the funding side is the biggest one of those, at least that is out there before us at the moment. I think it's interesting to consider former Chief James Craig's campaign. It's been pretty quiet in the last several months. The biggest news being that he split with one of his major advisors from the campaign. But quiet is what I would describe the Craig campaign at the moment. I think Mr. Rinke, as I said, has got some funding advantages, and that could really help carry him forward through the primary season, depending in part on what his opponents do. And Chief Craig is only one of them. There are a handful of others that are likely to make it a very interesting Republican primary. I think in the general, it really does depend who comes out of that Republican primary. 2022 is shaping up to be a bad year for Democrats. And I say that because of a couple of factors. One, the current political dynamics, right? The president is seeing his approval ratings sink. We've got inflation that is the highest in decades. We've got other issues that we're facing as a nation and a state. But I also say it because that's what history tells us. History tells us that the party of the president does poorly in midterm elections, which 2022 is, right? It comes at the midpoint of a president's term in office. And the reason for that, generally speaking, is that the president has been in office for a couple of years, and the country maybe has soured on the president's performance. The country is disappointed that the president maybe hasn't followed through with some campaign promises. And you can see that coming up, boiling up as well, right? And how often did we hear Joe Biden say he was going to shut down the virus? And I mean, maybe that was a mistake for him to say that, because there's, what can one person do? What can one government do to shut down a virus? And we're seeing maybe that come back to haunt him. So anyway, for whatever reason, right, the public is down on the president, but the president's not on the ballot in midterms. So where does the public turn to take out their frustration? Well, they turn to the candidates of the president's party. And for example, in only 2 elections back to the years of FDR, in only 2 elections has the party of the president gained seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Only twice in that period, right? In every other instance, they have lost seats, and sometimes they've lost huge numbers of seats. And I think in Michigan, we see that trickle down to the state level. And I say that because since 1976, only one time has the candidate of the president's party been elected governor. So that would tell us that Gretchen Whitmer's in for some, for a tough campaign, and maybe even to lose. However, and here's the interesting thing about Michigan politics, in that same time period, only one time has a sitting governor been denied re-election. So we have these 2 forces that are working against each other. And in November of 2022, we'll have to see which of those forces wins out.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, a political science professor and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Dave, another minute with you before we'll say goodbye. I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about any upcoming events or discussions at the Center for Civic Engagement.
Sure. Well, thanks as always for the opportunity, Tyler. In the new year, look for the center to continue our office hours series, where we highlight faculty experts at Oakland University. We have a number of those lined up for the community and for campus on topics like politics, on topics like redistricting, the 2022 election cycle, the governor's race. We're also going to do one on inflation, the supply chain, and other economic issues that will and could affect the election cycle. And we've got some other things that are in the hopper and not ready to talk about those yet because the plans aren't finalized, but we'll have plenty for those who are interested to check us out in the new year.
Well, Dave, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, clarifying some of these issues that we're discussing here in the state of Michigan, and looking forward to 2022 and what will be a very interesting year politically here in the state of Michigan.
That's for sure. Thanks, Tyler.